Emperor, we come for you! We come for you!
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
Long live the fighters!
And we are back. We are back with another episode of the Fusion Underground. This is, what is this? Are we on season or is episode 7?
Yeah, 7, I believe.
7, I believe, yes. Gosh, they seem to be going by pretty quick.
Yeah, which is great. That means at least we're not boring ourselves out yet.
Right? Right. Well, we're not boring ourselves yet. So anyway, welcome to episode 7 of the Fusion Underground. I'm your host, Manuel Ramirez, and I'm here joined as always in our virtual studio with my fabulous and wonderful co-host, my brother, Jason Moret. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, brother. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So for those of you joining and listening to us, hopefully we have some first-time listeners. I don't know.
We just keep recycling the same 5 people.
You and me are 2 of them. So for any stragglers we may have happened to have picked up over the last, day, here at the Fusion Underground, we try to make sense of the world by having principled discussions about such topics as entertainment, current events, politics, and culture. Our mission is to educate people to become critical thinkers so they can live more empowered and happier lives. At least that's our mission. I don't know if we're accomplishing that at all, but that is
we're having fun trying.
That's right. We're having fun trying. As always, you can find all of our RSS feeds and everything to the podcast and to our YouTube channel at fusionunderground.net. We do have a Facebook page. If you do go out to Facebook facebook.com/AZ Fusion Underground, you'll find us. We have a YouTube channel where we put this video also on BitChute as well, if you're into BitChute. And you can find us on Twitter at the FU Brothers. If you go out to our website, you can get all of the RSS feeds for the audio version of the show off of Anchor, Breaker, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, and Stitcher. As well as just you can actually capture the RSS feed directly and just plug it into any podcast application that you might have laying around, and then it should find us on just through the RSS feed. So today's topic, now I mentioned this to you earlier, but today's topic I'm a little nervous about because
I know you are. Actually,
yeah.
I can tell because you're still sharing our Fusion Underground screen.
I know. Well, I'm doing that intentionally because I want to get something up onto the screen really quick.
Oh, okay.
But so that was intentional. Wasn't the nervousness side of things.
Sorry. My presumptuousness is getting the better of me.
Yeah, see how you are? How you are?
That's better.
But no, I'm a little nervous about this episode. This is all about free speech. This is the topic for today.
You're nervous about free speech, and yet
we're doing a podcast.
We're doing a podcast, which is kind of a bastion of free speech, or at least one of the last bastions of it. So why are you nervous?
It's we're going to get into this. One of the reasons why I'm nervous about free speech is with the craziness that is going on in the world, especially in the United States. People, if you are guilty of wrongthink, that can have dire consequences against you. And so when we talk about free speech, we're going to be talking about what that is, what free speech is, what it means to the country, and basically how people are terrible at free speech. And so I know by going down that avenue, we're going to probably open up some cans of worms, and some folks may not like that too well.
Well, that's okay. I'm in a place, we're not going to please everybody, and I'm going to upset people along the way. But then again, I've kind of lived in that place my whole life. I think you're breaking into that gently.
Yeah.
I embrace the idea of upsetting everybody first and then explaining my position later. See if we can find some common ground. Actually, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Well, we'll see what happens.
yeah.
Thankfully, we don't have a tremendous amount of listeners who might get pissed off at us all of a sudden, but who knows?
Or at least not the angry ones who are going to start beating down my door or shooting up my driveway for it.
Right?
At least I hope. Not yet,
threatening
anyway.
physical harm. Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I do have a palate cleanser for you. I did find something.
Yay!
I wasn't actually searching for anything, but I found this and I thought, okay, I have to share this with Jason.
I love it.
So with everything going on, I don't know if you heard, but Cops, after how many years, has been canceled? 30 years or whatever it's been?
It was like 26, 27 consecutive seasons, something like that. I can remember.
Yeah, they canceled Cops, because everybody now wants to cancel cops. They want to cancel them. They want to defund them. And so Cops was canceled, and some other live PD
PD.
Yeah, that one was also canceled.
Yeah, it was live PD.
So in honor of Cops being canceled, I found this little ditty.
Oh boy. All right.
Yeah. Oh boy's right. So let me go ahead and play this for you. It's only about a minute long. I'll play the whole thing. Be prepared to be wowed. I hope you like it.
$20. I gave her a 20 and she didn't give me nothing.
Why does she owe you $20?
$20 bill. I gave her a $20 bill.
For what?
For anything. I don't care. Whatever it's for, but she can give me my money back if she ain't gonna do nothing with it.
Okay, were you planning to buy some drugs or something?
Yes, I was.
What kind of drugs were you wanting to buy?
Rock. Yes, I was.
You gave her $20 to buy.
I gave her $20. She gave me some plaster.
And now you want your $20 back
Yes, I do.
because she didn't supply you with crack cocaine.
Well, if she shouldn't give me nothing, no plaster or nothing, she should have said no.
What's going on?
She come around here a while ago. It used to be some people live right over there that used to sell.
Yeah.
We were sitting out here on the porch in some church. So she said, y'all have anything to buy? I said, no, baby, we don't have nothing to sell. So she left one around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Then she come back 10 minutes later, hollered, give me my money back up. No, you ain't bought nothing from here. Don't disrespect my child. This is my child.
Mm-hmm.
I don't sell crack. I'm a prostitute. From here, don't disrespect my child. This is my child.
Mm-hmm.
I don't sell crack. I'm a prostitute.
$20.
Get it right. How dare you disrespect me? I don't sell no drugs. I'm a prostitute.
I'm a prostitute.
I sell my body. I'm proud of that.
It's like it just kept getting worse. It was like this train wreck in slow motion. It just kept getting worse and worse. The more the stakes just kept getting higher and higher.
Dare you, sir? How just dare you accuse me of being a drug dealer?
God bless our police force, our police officers. They have to deal with that kind of stuff. And I don't even know I don't even know what to do with that. Like, I wish we could watch the entire show. I have no idea what episode that was on, but
I could only imagine going, my mistake, ma'am. Move right along. No,
Yeah.
Sorry, there's no drugs at this house. Oh, and by the way, can you please come with me? I don't know. Yeah, God bless our men in blue, because
Right.
I couldn't do what they did.
yeah,
I don't think I could. I thought I might have could at one point, but I don't think I could.
at one time.
Yeah.
At one time.
I think I got accused of being saying I look like a cop too much. Trim this up a lot. I think it changes it. The beard.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I had enough people tell me you look like you could be a cop. Oh, maybe that's something I should think about and fit the role.
Oh gosh. Well, free speech.
Yeah, I don't sell crack. I'm a prostitute.
And you are free to say such things.
She's got a right to say that. Keep in mind anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. But
Yes, in a court of law. Well, let's get into the topic. Let's talk about free speech.
All right. Okay.
So, yeah. So let's kind of start and set the foundation here before we dive into all of this, right? We do have, we are the only country on the planet that actually has a guarantee of free speech by our government. laid out in the Constitution, one of our founding documents. And I say one of because the Declaration of Independence is another one of our founding documents, right? So we do have this freedom of speech. And it's very, it's very vague as to what the First Amendment actually says, right? It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech. That's really it. That's just that single phrase, or abridging the freedom of speech. It goes on and says, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. But everything that we do online, everything that we write, say, even, the types of artwork that we develop, and we talked about art last week on the show, and how art kind of ties into freedom of speech. All of those things are protected because of this simple line on our Constitution. So we have this freedom of speech that we are guaranteed. So the question becomes, right? There's and the reason why I wanted to talk about this, one, because since we started the show, we've been trying to articulate and have these kinds of conversations about different topics, but from a principled point of view. And I think having a respect or admiration or high regard of the ability the freedom of speech, I think is important and ties in to principles and the ability to have these kinds of discussions. So I wanted to talk about that. Plus, I wanted to just kind of talk about it from the perspective of, I think people are really bad at it.
Yeah, I can agree with that 100%. I know people are bad at it, but in the general public defense, we're conditioned to be bad at it. And what I mean by that is we're told, this type of speech is protected, this type of speech is not. That you're allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. I mean, you've got political correctness shaping what we are allowed to do, say, think, feel, and express. And like you talked about before, when you're saying that we're actually having these kind of discussions to exchange free thinking ideas and come up with that. If we're not allowed to express any of that freely, then the thought process behind that completely dies as well. Because if you limit the expression, you limit the thought process, and that's how you indoctrinate the masses. So,
yeah, one of the things that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because of the way members of our society change very specific words. Okay, we have, words mean things, and I like to say that all the time, that words mean things. I spend a lot of time working with people in business. In business, you're writing documents for a variety of things, right? And I'm always amazed by the number of people that I run into and the number of documents that I read that are poorly written. And even when we're trying to do something as basic or as simple as just communicate between team members, people often lose sight of the fact that words mean things. But when we elevate that beyond our office or our business setting, and we go out into the political realm or just from a societal standpoint, words mean things. And we see, I think over the last probably close to 20 years now, we've really been attacking the types of words that we use in society. For example, there used to be global cooling many years ago, about 30 years ago, right? And that gave way to global warming. And well, that didn't really sound very well, or it didn't play well for a lot of the masses. And eventually that phrase became climate change, right? To mask things that were going on. Well, that's kind of disingenuous, because the climate is always changing. There are people who have said that a climate is always changing, and it has. The climate has always changed. Whether humans have existed on the earth or not, the climate of the planet was always changing. But if we change it to something like climate change, then it becomes whatever we want it to be. It's not just specifically getting warmer, or it's not just specifically getting cooler. It's now just changing. And so now we can apply that kind of mentality to that.
Right. But I mean, if you look at it from in that way, if you actually change the words that you're using to describe the situation, then you can actually pull in evidence proving and disproving and manipulating that as proof or disproof
Sure.
to your argument. If you've got global cooling and we see warming happen, well, then you've got a lot of naysayers going, well, how can it be cooling if it's actually warming outside? And,
Right.
and vice versa. If it's warming and you see cooling, well, if you see change, and then you've got naysayers out there saying, well, the climate's always changed. Well, see, you see it too.
Right.
Of course it is. I mean, so yeah, if you can
we get to keep
change
moving
it,
the goalposts.
exactly, and if you can keep changing the definition of what you're actually arguing for, then you actually open up a whole realm of possibility of bringing
Right.
in evidence to support that argument. So
Right. When President Bush was in office, we had the war in Afghanistan. But once Obama became president, that war in Afghanistan became overseas contingency operation. We had terrorism when Bush was in office, but when Obama became president, terrorism became man-made disasters. Young criminals, we couldn't say young criminals anymore for a while. Young criminals became justice-involved youth.
justice involved you?
Justice involved youth. We didn't.
Oh, I missed that.
We were no longer paying taxes. Instead, taxes became individual responsibility payments.
that's a good, I hadn't heard that either, but
Yeah.
I can.
Taxes are bad. Taxes are bad. We can't run on taxes. But individual responsibility payments. Well, that doesn't sound so bad.
No, that
Right?
sounds.
I want to be
an awful lot
responsible.
like everybody needs to pay their fair share.
Pay their fair share, right? I mean, that
Right.
sounds. I want to be responsible. Who doesn't want to be responsible?
Yeah.
Government spending stopped being government spending because, well, that doesn't sound very good. And instead, government spending became investments.
Investments. I
We
would have.
were investing.
That would have been more of an allocation of governmental finances.
No, it was just simple investment.
Oh, okay.
If you want to keep what you earn, well, we call that greed.
Greed. I was going to say selfishness.
We call that greed. But if I want more of what you earn, well, that's not greedy. That's called paying your fair share.
Right. Oh, okay. So
Right.
I had that with the rich need to pay their
Right,
fair share.
right.
Yeah.
In Congress, if you oppose Democrats, well, we call that obstruction.
Yes.
But in Congress, if you oppose Republicans, well, that's called resistance.
Okay. I'm with you. Keep going.
We used to have a thing called justice, and justice is about getting what you deserve without favor. You're due, getting what you are deserved without any specific favoritism at play. That was originally what we referred to as justice. But then we came up with this term referred to as called social justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's getting what you don't deserve because you are favored.
Okay.
In social justice, right? So we've come up with all of these different terms, these different words to use, which really are designed to mask reality. They're designed to mask truth. I'm sorry, but taxes are bad. People know that taxes are bad. People don't want to pay more taxes. We don't want to have higher taxes, for example. We're already taxed enough. And so we have to change that to something that's a little bit more palatable, something that masks what is actually happening in the objective reality of the world in which we live. And so we change that to individual responsibility payments.
Individual responsibility payments.
And so this is why I say that words mean very specific things. Words have meanings. We can try to mask a word by coming up with a synonym, and maybe some ignorant people might go along with it. But it still doesn't change what we're actually trying to do. But the problem is by changing the language. See, the problem with all of this is language exists for us to take what it is that is happening in our minds and our brains, right? We're thinking of different stuff, and we need to articulate those things, and we need to put them out into the public sphere so that we can talk about very specific things in very specific ways. And if you start to change the language, what you try to do, or what you're attempting to do in that process, is to change the way that people think.
Right.
and control their behavior through their thought processes and through their actual words. George Orwell wrote about this in 1984. There was the whole wrong think concept, right? The main character of the book was responsible for going through and purging words out of a dictionary, and declaring certain words. The government, Big Brother, and everything was constantly banning words from the language. If you ban those particular words, and there are plenty of words that we cannot say. There are words that we have decided we are not going to say. Words that are very, very derogatory against certain races or groups of people. So we have chosen to ban these words. Where I start getting into, getting really nervous is when we ban words either because we're compelled, because government has forced our hand, or we have people that are forcing us to change our words, or suffer retaliation.
Right. Well, and in the government, I believe is at least smart enough to know that you're not going to be able to come in and police every household in order to ban speech. They can't do that. And the use of certain language is absolutely what you're talking about, and that's banning speech. I mean, we talked about this last week, even with the idea of banning books and banning literature. You're banning ideas, which is a expression of speech. So now, I mean, that walks a fine line. And our guest last week was talking about banning books or movies to specific audiences. And I think he used the example of like 4-year-olds trying to read Gone with the Wind. No reason for them to do that. I can understand that to a point, but where does the enforcement come? So unless you're going to have the government show up with guns to actually enforce those laws, then you need the public to willingly offer up to do that, I guess, that self-editing, and for the public to enforce that editing upon each other. And that's where things like what you're talking about, there's a lot of language, there's a lot of words, there's a lot of names, there's a lot of, call it what you will, and everybody out there knows exactly what we're talking about in a lot of these situations where you're not allowed to use certain derogatory names or words or phrases or ever. And should you do that, it's not the government who's going to lock you up. It's you are going to suffer the penalties of your peers and your fellow citizenry, because it is the masses who have declared that type of speech essentially illegal.
Yeah, and when I originally came up with this topic several weeks ago for the show, and I kind of put it into our roadmap of different shows that I wanted to talk about. There was really a primary reason why I did it. Yes, there's all kinds of craziness happening, especially on social media from a political standpoint. But there was one main reason why I wanted to talk about this, and it goes back to our purpose as a show. For me, one of the primary reasons of doing a podcast like this was because I wanted to, and I say it at the beginning of every episode, I wanted to try to educate people on how to become critical thinkers. And free speech is fundamentally linked to the ability to think. And the reason why I say that is because thinking is very difficult to do. And thinking is very difficult to do. I think it was Carl Jung who said that we don't really think. That most people what they do is they tend to have an idea, and then they just simply believe whatever idea pops into their head, and people tend to equate that with thinking. But that's not really what thinking is about, because thinking is very, very difficult to do. We're filled with all sorts of different biases, right? And if we're going to think about a topic and really think about that topic, or really think about something, a particular subject or concept, right, we have to somehow find it in ourselves to challenge our biases, challenge our assumptions, When we have that idea that pops in our mind, we might agree with that initially, but we need to be able to break away from the agreeance part, and look at it from different angles and say, well, is there another possibility that could be happening here? Is there a rival theory that takes place here? And that is very, very difficult for people to do.
Sure. Well, and even if you do agree with an idea, okay, I just had an idea pop in my head. I agree with that. Well, wait, why? Why do I agree with that? Why
Right.
was I so quick to agree with that? Why did it take me a while to come around? Because and we talked about this before, asking the who, what, where, why, when, and hows, about those, and being able to challenge it. If you've got biases in your mind, and I know I'm going to buy into this, at least being able to recognize that you're biased is step one. Well, is it possible to isolate that bias, and if so, how? Those are the kind of internal struggles, I think that a lot of free thinkers struggle with back and forth. I call them the Winnie the Poohs, because they need to go to their thoughtful spot and touch their head and think,
Think. Yes.
not just to come up with an idea, but actually taking one back. Okay,
Right.
I had the idea. Wait, don't get up and run away yet.
Right.
Sit down and go think a little bit more.
Yeah, and most people, what they're, I think the majority of people in our society, they don't. There's no need for them to really sit down and think. I'm not saying that people are incapable of doing it. I think that their daily lives, the things that they're constantly struggling with, to pay the bills and to take care of their family, and their thinking or their thought process are really around those day-to-day activities. What are we gonna have for dinner? If we're gonna go out to a movie, at least not right now, what movie we're gonna see? That's not really what I'm talking about in terms of thinking. You might sit and think about what you want to eat. I'm not talking about what it is that you want to eat. I'm talking about these concepts like, what is freedom of speech and why is it important? Or I'm talking about other concepts like, does systemic racism exist, right? These are these lofty sorts of concepts that you need to think about, because
Right.
they're going to have an impact on your life in some form or fashion, even if it's about who are you going to vote for in the next election or in your local election or things of that nature.
Well, and I think the biggest difficulty that most people face when they're actually looking at heavy topics like what we're talking about, they live in all of us, it's not a they, it's a we live in a socially driven society. And what I mean by that is we're not really tackling ideas or problems when it comes to actual issues themselves. We look at the social impact that those issues have, and we relate those to the physical people, and the emotional responses, and the how that's going to impact us socially, more than how that impacts us physically or tangibly as a society. Because I believe that we've become so socially connected as a society now that is if it hasn't already, it's really starting to define us as a people. It's not about even as far as we are talking about free speech. It's not really about what we say, but how whatever it is we say is actually perceived by the people around us, and how they interpret that, and then how they react to that. If you really want to get into what people, I think about, it's probably more the social interactions they have with people on a daily basis, rather than the esoteric ideas that we're pondering out about values or principles, or whether you think racism is a systemic problem and actually exists. It's because if they feel it, then it is existing. If it's affecting people in a social level, then it absolutely must exist. That's the evidence.
And so how does all this tie back to things like speech, right? We're talking about thinking, right? We started with defining some terms and, talking about different words that have switched meanings and such. And then I started talking about, well, it's really about thinking. And so there might be somebody listening to this that goes, well, what the hell is he referring to in terms of thought versus speech, right? How are those two things linked? And so I want to run something by you, because I want to see what you think about it.
Okay.
And I'm not the only one who believes this. There are a lot of psychologists, for example, and psychiatrists and such who think this way. But the idea is we're so bad at thinking, right? We need to be able to speak our minds and speak freely, and we need to put an idea out into the world. And when we put that idea out into the world, now it's ripe for other people to look at it from a different perspective with different biases or whichever. They can now look at what we've said in maybe a slightly more objective fashion, and maybe not necessarily an objective fashion. Maybe they are looking at it with all of their different biases. But if their biases are going to be different from yours, and they look at what it is that you've said, whether you put it in writing or they're just listening to you speak, right? They're going to say, well, wait a minute, you sound like an idiot. And this is why I think you're an idiot. And so you need to be able to receive that feedback, right? And say, you know what, maybe there's something there, or that's not really what I meant. Here's what I'm trying to say, right? We've all had those kind of conversations.
Sure.
Where we say, well, you know, that's not really what I was trying to say. This is more about what, and you need to have that kind of dialogue. You need to have that kind of dialogue, because it is through that activity of me saying something and then you telling me that I'm an idiot, and me thinking about going, how did you think that? That's not what I said. What I'm trying to say is this. We're now engaged in an activity of open thinking between the two of us.
Correct. No, and that dialogue, that open conversation is what actually fires off. You know, when you're actually having a conversation with another person, you talked about psychologists. So I'm just going to tease on that for a little bit. There have been multiple studies about actually watching brainwaves interact during a two-way conversation versus someone actually watching or listening to a lecture or reading a book where the exact same ideas are exchanged. And, you know, when you've got somebody reading a book, listening to a lecture, who's actually receiving information, you can actually trace out new ideas coming up and new perspectives being built. And, you know, information's happening. You see the little brainwaves going up and you're like, oh, look, he's thinking, how cute. When you have a two-way dialogue conversation where there's back and forth, I mean, it's like a Christmas tree on fire. I mean, everything firing off.
Right.
Because even while I'm talking to you and I'm watching you mostly half pay attention to me while you're looking for whatever else you're doing right now, I'm actually creating other thoughts in my head about and noticing the smirk on your face or noticing this, even trying to convey that. All of that's creating a whole symphony in your brain about what's actually happening. And how does thought equate to speech? Without speech, you can't get anything going on in your head out of your head to anyone else.
Yeah.
You might as well be a vegetable.
So I'm going to play something for you. This is from, you know who Joe Rogan is.
No, never heard of Joe.
I'm gonna play something from Joe Rogan. This is something that Joe Rogan has said during one of his stand-ups. It's not a video, so I'm just gonna
I was gonna say, was that from Fear Factor podcast,
No.
UFC, or okay, so we're on to.
So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm not going to apologize for Joe Rogan. I think this is funny. I think he makes a very valid point. Are there going to be people who might listen to this who might be offended? Yes, but take it up with Joe Rogan, because I'm not really concerned about what he's saying or how he's saying it.
Time out. Before the disclaimer finishes, because my understanding was comedy was completely 100% covered. It had the paper sack of immunity over any kind of offense. You're not allowed to get offended at comedy. I thought that was the rule.
Well, that's just not the case. People are getting offended regardless.
All right. Yeah.
But listen to this, and I want people to listen to what Joe Rogan has to say. Yes, he's crass and he's crude and everything like that. And that's Joe Rogan being Joe Rogan. He is what he is, right? But I want to play this because I think it makes a very valid and very interesting argument. I think he makes a very interesting argument, and I think it ties in exactly with what we're talking about here. So let me play this for you.
The problem with people that are homophobic is that you don't want to ever be labeled homophobic, so you let gay people say some ridiculous shit and not call them on it. And that's not good for gay people. Okay? Everybody should be called on their bullshit. Because when we say ridiculous shit, someone's supposed to go, bitch, what? And if no one says bitch, what, when you say ridiculous shit, you're hanging around with the wrong group of people.
He's right.
Well, yeah.
He's absolutely right, because you know, I mean, he doesn't go on to say, you know, you're thinking and all this kind of stuff, but but he's tapping into that exact same theme. You need
Mm-hmm.
to be able to speak, and then people can say, in Joe Rogan's term, bitch what? And so then you can go, okay, well, here, let me qualify that, or let me put some extra explanation around that.
Right.
You know, and I don't know about you. I've been in this kind of situation where I've had to have a difficult conversation with somebody, with people in the past, right? We all have probably been in that situation. And in some instances, I'll say, you know what? I really don't know how to say this. So I'm just going to talk, and I'm probably going to say things that sound really crazy or really ridiculous. And I don't want you to get mad right away. I want you to kind of think about it and challenge me on some things, so that by us talking, I can articulate what it is that I'm feeling, or what it is that I've been thinking, and I don't, right? So I'll have that conversation. I'll preface that to the conversation, and then I'll start talking. And then it's just the stream of consciousness. And you have to do that if you're going to think through something.
Yeah. And I've done that exact. Okay. I've gone, this is going to sound probably really bad. And I'm sorry, I just can't figure out how to articulate this any other way. And if I don't get this out, we're never going to be able to move on. So I'm going to say this. Try not to get upset. If you do, I understand, but let's maybe we can figure out how to solve it, because this is where I'm at and I'm stuck here.
Right.
Blah. And then the shock look. I'm like, I know. Help me. Help us get through whatever that was, because that had to be crazy. Yeah. But I mean, I had that conversation literally Thursday. I did. Right. I know this sounds terrible, and I'm really sorry. And I actually had to have that conversation with my boss, which was very, very dangerous. But yeah, it's when you have to throw a disclaimer out there just so you can express yourself. Unfortunately, that happens.
Right. And we know about this in personal life, right? We know about when we're working with somebody, whether it's, we're in a friend relationship, a friendship relationship, or it's with our significant other, or if it's with somebody at work, sometimes you're going to have to, let me, no, that didn't come out right, did it?
There you go.
I'm just talking about one-on-one relationships only.
Yeah.
So we recognize that when we have these one-on-one relationships, right, with different people in different contexts, interactions with different people, right?
There you go.
We automatically, intuitively recognize that if there's a problem, we have to find some way to put it out on the table, lay the problem out so that we can fix it. And we can't address that problem until we have defined that problem and we articulate it. And that's a very common thing. I think most people would listen to that and say, yeah, that's reasonable. We have to talk about it.
Right.
But for some reason, when we get on social media, and especially when we're talking about politics, people don't look at each other, or they don't come at each other with that same kind of idea or that same mentality. It's immediately we're talking. Politics has become like sports. It's just my team versus your team, and I don't care as long as my team wins.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We actually used to play a game when we went to the Renaissance Fair called vilification tennis, and it's just throwing insults back and forth at each other, literally like a tennis match. And whoever got the other person stumped where they couldn't come back with any kind of insult. I mean, it was kind of like the whole, your mama battles. You remember those? Yeah. Same thing. But no, when you get on a social media platform or online, or where there's any idea that there's this anonymity platform where you don't have that one-on-one face-to-face. I mean, even you and I here have more one-on-one face-to-face than you do with your phone on Twitter. And that completely takes any of that personability out of it. And unfortunately, those disclaimers should be getting longer in those areas, not shorter. Right. When I'm at work and I'm dealing with a coworker or employer or even clients, you've done that same thing. That disclaimer that you throw out right before you're going to say something awful starts getting really long, and a lot of apologies in there. At home with my wife, that disclaimer is real short. I go, honey, what did you think of dinner? She goes, oh, honey, I love you. And I know it's coming. Yeah, that's, and sometimes she didn't have to say anything after that. I just go, 10-4. All right, my bad. You want a sandwich? Yeah. Okay. But when you get onto those social media platforms, I mean, it's there's nothing. It's just nothing but blast and hate, and that's another reason why I don't participate.
There's an article that I want to share with you. This was off of Mediafile. I don't even know when this was published. I know it was recent. It was recently published, maybe. I don't know. Maybe a year ago or something. I don't know. Because there's no date on it. I would love to be able to say when it was actually, like, the day it was actually published to this website, but I have no idea. It's called mediafiledc.com. The author didn't even put their name on it.
Oh, well, that lends to a lot of credence.
Oh, here it is. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It did. April 12th, 2018. Like, I looked at this website several times, and I finally see right now, thankfully, who wrote it and when they wrote it. So back in 2018, this guy, Matt, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, Gioia.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. I would mangle his name, so I'm not even going to attempt it.
Okay.
So anyway, he wrote this article, and it's called "It's Time to End the Joe Rogan Experience." Joe Rogan being a stand-up comic, right? He does his podcast, which is, they tend to be 2 to 3 hours in length. And all he does is he interviews people that he finds to be interesting. Well, Matt here writes this article about it's time to end the Joe Rogan Experience. He says, throughout his 30-year career in entertainment, Joe Rogan has earned a legion of fans as the host of Fear Factor, the voice of the UFC, and through his appearance on Mad TV. But despite these roles, he's mostly known as the host of the highly successful Joe Rogan Experience podcast. He goes on to say, in the years since his podcast debuted, Rogan has become one of the most influential celebrities in the United States. Now, that's a key call out, right? That this author writes. He's referring to him as one of the most influential celebrities, and I think Joe Rogan is.
Whether you like him or don't,
whether you like him or not,
you have to admit that he is absolutely influential in our current society. Yes.
Yeah, he has millions of people listening to his podcast every week. We can only dream of having that kind of an audience. Right. But he's one of the most influential podcasters, and probably one of the most influential interviewers on the planet right now. Okay. So Matt goes on to say, while many would claim that Rogan's podcast is pure entertainment, Rogan's rhetoric and choices of whom to associate his podcast with are harmful to his listeners and promote hysteria among his audience. Now, of course, he says this without any evidence.
Right.
Well, if people were actually hysterical, if his audience was actually hysterical, then why are they listening to him? Do they want to be hysterical all the time?
In all fairness, and I don't know where this article goes, and I have no love or hate for the Joe Rogan Experience or Joe Rogan. So that being said, I don't see how he would be any more influential or less than any other interviewer on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, other than the sheer fact that we can actually visually see how many people he's touching with his voice in that. And if you want to talk about inciting hysteria, the actual media, I think, is doing more of that than anyone else. Well, but that's an opinion, and that's mine.
Yeah, and this is pretty egregious, right? I mean, to write that his podcast is harmful.
Right. In what way? How are you measuring that?
Right. Drugs are harmful to people, right?
Right.
Pharmaceuticals can be harmful to people depending on who's taking them and the dosage and all that sort of. Fire is harmful to people. Lava is harmful to people. I don't think that Joe Rogan's podcast is the equivalent of fire or lava, which is causing harm to people.
Might be close to COVID-19. I don't know. It's the numbers are still varying on that. But
well, let me read a little bit more of this article. Matt goes on to say, throughout his podcast history, he, along with various guests, have constantly discussed and have given credence to various conspiracy theories. Oh no.
Okay.
That sounds bad. Rogan has proclaimed on his podcast that he believed that the Apollo astronauts did not land on the moon, that the United States government was behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and that the government found aliens in Roswell, New Mexico. Now, I have no idea. I do not listen to the Joe Rogan Experience. I have no idea if Joe Rogan has professed belief in these sorts of ideas, but
well, he sure as heck didn't come up with them.
But who cares? Right.
I know that for a fact. Some of those have been going on for a long dang time.
But so
and-
what if he did? I mean, if he did, so what?
Yeah.
Like you said, he didn't come up with these.
Yeah.
They already exist. They existed before the Joe Rogan Experience, and they will continue to exist after. Now, yes, somebody can make an argument, and I think this is Matt's argument is, well, if people didn't know about it and they happen to listen to Joe Rogan while he's professing belief in a conspiracy theory, well, then maybe those people would believe what Joe Rogan says. And I'm thinking, okay, now there have been a couple of times when I have listened to the Joe Rogan Experience, mainly because I wanted to listen to the interviewee that he had on his show. Now, if all of his episodes are the same way that go the same way of the few episodes that I listened to, I think Joe Rogan in a 3-hour time period talked about how high he was maybe 3 or 4 different times. So if you're listening to Joe Rogan and you don't know that most of the time he's operating high off his ass, why would you believe anything Joe Rogan says?
Right. Well, and it's I want to go. I almost have to go back to this idea of control. That unfortunately, right now, and I think we're kind of example of that. The podcast realm is actually really picking up in our society right now. It is, as a form of media and a form of free expression.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, we probably wouldn't be here doing this, which that's awesome. I'm glad we are.
Sure.
And as of right now, it is nowhere near the amount of regulation involved in doing this as there is in, let's say, going on even talk radio on AM, that you could probably, just get a big ham radio and start broadcasting. There's a lot of regulation out there, so there's a lot of control out there. So any kind of free exchange of ideas that's not regulated, especially when you start looking at the amount of listeners that Rogan has, like you said, we're talking millions. That can become very powerful. And so do I believe that someone in Joe Rogan's position, not him necessarily, could actually start influencing the masses with his speech? Yes, he could. Do I think that he's doing that by saying that we never landed on the moon and we fooled the Russians and ended the space race? I don't care. But that's part of the greatness of that too. I don't have to believe any of that.
I don't have to care. Right. I don't have to believe in it. I don't have to listen to Joe Rogan.
And show me some evidence of it. Maybe I'll start going, I'll get back to my thinkful spot and I go, think.
But here, let me get to the crux of, I think, why this,
okay, we haven't even
author,
hit there yet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we haven't even hit the main point. But this is why I think Matt wrote this particular article. He goes on to say that Rogan, whether he is aware of it or not, is promoting alt-right figures and their ideology through his podcast. Aha. See, this is the problem, right? Matt does not view himself as a member of the right or a member of the alt-right, right? So he doesn't like opposing viewpoints to be put out there.
Okay. All right. Now,
because let me finish this one paragraph and then I'll give it over to you. Because Matt goes on to say, meaning Rogan, his list of guests include Alex Jones, Milos Yiannopoulos, and Steven Crowder, all of whom have espoused rhetoric that is factually inaccurate and who deliberately instill fear or hatred for their own benefit. Now that's a tall order right there. Deliberately instill fear or hatred for their own benefit. Of course, there's no link here. There's no additional explanation as to how he has made or how he has come to that conclusion that these three, Alex Jones, Milos Yiannopoulos, and Steven Crowder, are factually inaccurate and who deliberately instill fear or hatred for their own benefit.
Well, no, and that sounds a little bit like cherry picking and almost trying to say that he's actually picking people that align with his beliefs. And I'll make a perfect example of how I know that is not what's happening over there. I believe, if not once, possibly twice, and I could be wrong, but I know once for sure he's had just recently Bernie Sanders on there.
Yes, he actually endorsed him.
Yes. Are you tending to tell me now that Bernie Sanders, because if that statement is true, that he only aligns himself with quote unquote alt-right individuals, which I'm going to get back to that word and definition here in just a second, then that would not be happening. You would not have Bernie Sanders, who is an open socialist, actually on your program and then turn around and endorse him. Come on. So either you are cherry picking the facts that, again, fit your argument, or you're trying to change it so that everything fits. And that term alt-right, and maybe, well, let's see, 2018. Yeah, some things have changed in 2 years, because I believe the definition of that word in the way that Matt, and I'm making a leap here, trying to use my own critical thinking skills, as little I have left, is actually trying to talk about a political alignment. Whereas right now, if I walk outside and I use the term alt-right, I don't believe that's what anybody thinks that term means anymore.
Right.
And this is what we're talking about the changing of our actual language. And by changing your language, you are literally changing the culture of the people.
Right. So Matt here goes on to say, I'm just going to finish this out here. Rogan is playing right into the alt-right's hands by providing a platform that humanizes them. Wait a minute. I have to stop right there. Providing a platform that humanizes them, meaning Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Steven Crowder, because we know that they're not humans. So therefore Joe Rogan is humanizing them. That's just ridiculous in and of itself. Anyway, he goes on, and instead of fact-checking their ludicrous statements, he allows them to espouse their beliefs to his audience, thereby lending his guests credibility and an audience to preach to. By doing this consistently, he, Rogan, is pushing their vile messages closer and closer into the mainstream and contributing to their acceptance into the social media world. His viewers have become susceptible to illogical, xenophobic, and hateful rhetoric, because Rogan gives people like Jones and Yiannopoulos a platform where they will not be challenged and called out for their words and behavior. In the wake of the Sinclair Broadcasting Group's mass fake news message, it is imperative that we call out organizations and people who repeatedly undermine the truth for their own benefits. Joe Rogan, inadvertent as it might be, is contributing to the narrative that all media is filled with gross misinformation and deceit. All this serves to do is further damage the public's trust in institutions and the truth itself. Well, who the hell made you the arbiter of truth, Mr. Matt something or other?
Well, and this is the unfortunate part about about the paper. Actually, up to a point, there's some points that Matt brings up that you and I are able to have some dialogue about, allow for some lenience in one area, give some credence to even some things to say that Joe Rogan's influential and this is how, and seeing how some of that could be utilized for nefarious means. I can absolutely, I can allow for that. When you start actually attributing what he's doing and actually saying that now, because these people are on the far right end of the conservative spectrum of politics, now they're not human, they're not worthy of having a voice, we shouldn't be listening to anybody, and now you're actually pulling everything into your own political bias. You're writing a paper so that you can put it on your platform and influence everyone else who might read it with your bias. I mean, how is that, if you're trying to be a beacon of truth and of integrity and weed through this swamp of vile degradation, then how is what you're doing not contributing to that on the exact opposite end of the spectrum? And I don't, that's where you lose me. I mean, that's where everything you had going for you, even in a little bit, you just obliterated your entire argument with your own political influence and bias, which is what you're accusing other people of.
Right. And again, this goes back to, getting that feedback and being told that, you're wrong, or you sound like a crazy person, or, bitch what, back to Joe Rogan, right? And if this Matt character, if he truly believes what he believes, okay, if he truly believes that Milo Yiannopoulos and Steven Crowder and Alex Jones. I've never watched Alex Jones. He always seemed like a crazy person to me. I know he gets a lot of flack from the left as being a crazy person and a tin hat wearer. I've never watched him. I have watched and listened to Milo Yiannopoulos and Steven Crowder. I think they're funny.
Yeah.
And I think they make a lot of really good points. But even for the sake of argument, if let's say all three of them are wrong, so be it. There's nothing stopping Matt from going out onto the internet for creating his own podcast or whatever and refuting those ideas and showing how they're wrong and actually debating them in the realm of ideas. But Matt doesn't want to do that. Matt actually just wants to shut Joe Rogan down, or at least he did back in 2018, because he doesn't want to do the heavy lifting. At least it seems to me, he doesn't want to do the heavy lifting of trying to unpack those ideas and thinking, well, could they be right? And let's look at it. Or are they wrong? And here's why. He doesn't want to do that. And so instead, he just wants to silence anybody who has an opposing thought against him. And that's dangerous. That's a very dangerous area to be in.
Right. Well, and then again, we in order for him to effectively do that without having to do the heavy lifting, then we label those kind of thoughts ideas, right? That's where you get terms like alt-right. You get terms like rhetoric. Those type of things actually immediately start going, well, okay, now that they've been labeled as disingenuous, unfounded, or wrong think, then I can discredit all of it without any thought on my own. And I think that's, again, going back to the idea that we are, I guess, socially bound in our speech, and not really relying on ourselves to do that critical thinking process. We actually go, well, okay, it's been labeled. Now I can move on to something else because I've got a lot of the things to tackle today. So.
And this is, for me, this is fundamentally important. A lot of times people will, I think there are far too many people in society who will read something that Matt says, and they might say, okay, Alex Jones, does come across as a crazy person. I don't know. Again, that's sure. The perception I think that a lot of people have created especially on social media, about Alex Jones, that Alex Jones is a crazy person. And so, well, yeah, maybe he should be silenced, right? He's a crazy person, so let's silence that person. I think there are people in this country, in our society, who will say that. Yeah. And say, oh yeah, okay, it makes sense. Let's, that person, he's a little too extreme. So yeah, let's go ahead and save that. The problem with that thinking is, or that attitude is, where does it end?
Well, sure. And when I hear those are, so, okay, let's just pretend. All right, if I give you Alex Jones, then who do I get to silence?
Right.
And I look at that and I have to do that myself, because there's a lot of people out there talking a lot of crazy stuff right now that I would love to not turn on the TV or the radio and hear his or her voice ever again. But if I say, well, if you silence someone like, well, let's take Alex Jones out of it and let's leave Matt out of it for the minute. And let's bring it back up to current. If you silence, pick somebody, you silence Donald Trump, you silence the president of the United States. Okay, does that mean I get to silence Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House, because I don't want to hear her? If it doesn't work both ways, then it doesn't work. And silencing people never works, because ultimately you're just going to run out of mouths. And for what? And then where does that get us? If we don't have opposing arguments with each other, we are never challenged to improve upon what we have. We talked about this, or at least touched on a similar idea when we were looking at mentoring, when we were talking about that. Mm-hmm. You do nobody a service by being nice to them and saving their feelings and not telling them the truth. If you've got a boss who you are not meeting the expectations, you're not making the cut, you're failing at everything, and they go, you know what? And they pat me on the head, Jason, you're doing okay. You're just doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. And I get fired 6 months later because I've never done my job. How is that helping me? So without any kind of challenge, even if it's on my ideas or something I say or anything like that, then where am I to grow? How am I to continually progress? And as a society, when we stop challenging ourselves, we're not going to progress.
Well, and if you're willing to give up a little bit, so even if you're willing to say, okay, we can silence the crazy Alex Jones, or we can silence the crazy Sean Hannity, or we can silence the crazy, the Young Turks, for example, on the left. If we're willing to accept certain silences, eventually you're going to wake up and they're going to start pressing against people that aren't so crazy.
Yeah.
Right? That don't sound so crazy. They're going to start pushing up and saying, now I want to silence this person who actually seems reasonable. And you're going to wake up one day and realize, well, like the old adage, you gave them an inch and they took a mile.
Right.
But you're asleep at the wheel because, well, it doesn't really affect me, right? I think there are too many people that get complacent and say, well, that doesn't really affect me, so it's okay. Go ahead and silence that one person, or go ahead and silence those 10 people. Well, where does it end?
Exactly.
Eventually, you're going to wake up and they're going to be trying to silence you, and now it's too late.
Well,
because you've given that mile.
If we say, okay, it's just the crazy people, right? It's just the crazy
who's
people.
Crazy?
Exactly.
Who
and
defines crazy?
It's a relative definition.
Right.
They're only crazy if you have them in a room full of actual, what we call normal people, right? Well, guess what? There's always going to be one person on the end of the spectrum. If you just keep cutting off the spectrum, eventually that's going to come down to right midline. It's where we talk about the quote unquote extremists, whether you're an extreme leftist or an extreme conservative or alt-right or whatever you want to. When you're out on the end, if you start cutting all that out, eventually, even just thinking outside of the midline is going to be an extremist.
Right. And we, the founders of this country enshrined freedom of speech in the Constitution for a reason. They did it so that we could talk about difficult things out in the public sphere, and we could settle political disputes and such amongst the populace. And then the population, the citizens, could then tell their senators or their representatives, et cetera, what should or shouldn't happen in terms of legislation in the country and so forth. So the free speech exists not just to criticize the federal government, for example, or not just to be able to paint a painting because you had a dream. It's there. It also exists. Part of its reason for existing is so that we can hash out these very difficult topics and very difficult concepts in the public space. Because if you're not permitted to do that, all we have to do is look at like the old Soviet Union after the Bolsheviks, took control of Russia in 1917. They stifled all kinds of free speech. They eliminated private property. They eliminated the free market. Hell, they even wanted to get rid of currency, and they tried. And the Soviets, the communists that took over, they tried many times to get to a full socialist utopia. But in order to do that, they had to control the behavior of people. And to control the behavior of people, they had to control their speech.
Right.
And by the height of the Cold War, people had language, people had modified their language for when they were out in the public space versus when they were behind closed doors. And there were just certain things that you couldn't talk about in the public space, because if you did and the wrong person heard you, well, then you got shipped off to the gulag, and they didn't put just criminals in the gulag. They put anybody that they wanted to that was deemed to be a political activist or an enemy of the party. You could, if you just happened to get on a train without a ticket, you could be imprisoned if that was perceived, if you were caught without a ticket, and if it was perceived that that was an affront against the party and the state, you could then get shipped off to the gulag. And most people that were shipped off, they didn't go in front of a trial of a court or anything.
No,
it was the police that captured them,
and you were
right,
gone.
and sent them.
Right.
And when we look at the fall of the late Soviet Union in 1991, you look at what was happening in the late 80s there. Well, Gorbachev was trying to restructure the communist state. And what he allowed, much to his surprise, was he allowed more people to start speaking freely, because he removed a lot of the penalties for speech if you spoke out against the government. He started to pull some of that back, and people it was just a floodgate. They let the stream of consciousness start to go. And that was part of why the Soviet Union eventually crumbled, because now ideas were cropping up and being shared across the Soviet Union. And it eventually was one of the things that led to the overall overthrow of the government. So the stifling of free speech led to the rise of of communism, and the reintroduction of free speech slowly led ultimately to its overall demise, among other things. But that was part of the thing that led to that demise.
Well, and I had this discussion with my wife months ago. In order to actually, the point I was making at the time was really controlling the masses of a free society. The first thing you have to do is you have to whittle away at those freedoms and those independence, so that the masses become reliant completely upon the government. And when you have a free society like ours, you cannot go in and just take them away. And you can't take them away in droves and enforce it at gunpoint. You can't do it. What you can do is allow the society to willingly offer up those individual liberties, bite-sized pieces at a time, so that you can protect them for their own right. And we have seen that over and over, especially in the last, I would say, about 10 years. We've sacrificed so much of our individual liberties for the sake of the public welfare and our own welfare, and done it willingly and almost applaudingly so.
Yeah.
And free speech has been attacked, and is being attacked probably on the forefront more than any of the others. And I mean, take it even to this COVID thing. You know, I remember when that first started popping up, when we were talking about having to quarantine. I said, well, you're not going to be able to do that. You can't institute martial law and arrest people at home. No, what they did instead was allow us to do that willingly on our own. And we did it. And we're still doing it graciously, thankfully, applauding all of the heroes who are out, who allowed us to do that. And yeah, I don't see that not coming back. That experiment has been tried, and it's been proven, and we're seeing that with our free speech. Our free speech has been under attack for a long time, and we do that, like we talked about already, in the realm of personal influence with each other. We've already regulated our speech. Political correctness, that's a weapon against free speech and the people of this country. It is. And anybody out there who doesn't believe that, really take a second, calm yourself down after you just heard me say it aloud, but really look at what it's attacking. It's attacking your ability to express yourself freely in the oppressions that are happening.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because there might be people that say, well, who cares? Aside from, it's happening now, and they might say, well, yeah, the Soviet Union was a different country. It was halfway around the world. It was a different thing. And what, nothing like that is happening here. And I say, well, you might be surprised. And I want to lay out a couple of examples. For example, in 2017, the governor of California, Jerry Brown at the time, he signed into law the ability to imprison healthcare workers if they failed to use a person's preferred pronouns. Throw them in jail. Put them in jail.
Mm-hmm.
If a healthcare worker failed to use somebody's preferred pronouns. In 2018, this is just 2 years ago. In 2018, a gentleman by the name of Peter Vlaming, he was a teacher, he was fired from his job. And his crime was he refused to use a student's preferred pronouns. You see, 1 year, the previous year, a student in his class was a girl. And in the next year, the same student came to campus and this time wanted to be referred to as a boy. Well, Mr. Vlaming didn't want to call her a boy because he knew that she was actually a girl. But he wanted to be respectful. And so what he did decide to do is he said, you know what? I will call you by your chosen name, by the name you picked.
Yep.
Right? So Sally became Bill or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, I'll call you by your chosen name. And what he did was he just refused to refer to the student by pronouns at all. So he only referred to the student by the student's chosen name, the male name. But because he refused to use male pronouns to describe the student in any cases, the school board decided that he should lose his job. In other words, they wanted to hear the words. The school board wanted to hear him say the words, and he didn't do so, so they fired him.
Right.
And so people might say, you know, there are people today that say, well, and this is really typical of younger generations, right? They say, well, you know, speech hurts. And speech, we heard it from that guy, Matt, right? He said, you know,
right.
Speech is harmful, where Joe Rogan was harming listeners. And we hear that a lot in today's society, that speech can be hurtful and can do damage and traumatizing. I've seen videos of interviews where people have saying, well, their words were traumatizing to me. They hurt me. And the problem for these people, what they fail to realize is, there is no such thing as hate speech being illegal. And for the purpose of Mr. Vlaming, you know, the Supreme Court also ruled that the government cannot compel you to say certain things. You know, we see this today where people want to force people to say specific pronouns. They want to, you know, call them she or they or whichever. And the SCOTUS has laid this out in numerous cases where they've said, no, you cannot be compelled to say certain things, and hate speech is not a thing. Hate speech is not a thing. Hate speech is just simply free speech. You do not have the right to not be offended.
Right. And nor do I have the right to say that I can or cannot offend you or make you feel any other way. I don't have that ability, nor do I have that control or over your emotions. I would argue that most people don't have control over their own emotions, let alone expecting somebody else to have control over how they might interpret and or be emotionally affected by that. That is not only is that absolutely unfair, it's absurd. And you know, we talk about free speech, either all speech is protected or none of it is. And if speech is an expression of thought, you might as well, if you're going to say that we're going to start regulating speech in that way, you're might as well going to be telling me whether I am allowed or not allowed to think.
Absolutely. You know, and even if you fail to use somebody's proper pronouns accidentally, if you know, thousands and thousands of years of evolution, we've looked at faces, we've looked at each other's faces, at human faces, and we have a pretty good eye of determining who's a male or who's a female. You watch I'm sure any number of people have done it. I'm sure you've done it, where you're watching a film and you can't see, you know, the character is at a distance. They're completely clad from head to toe. They might be wearing a motorcycle helmet. And you're like, that's a woman.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can tell there's certain features.
Well,
and sure enough, you know, she pulls her helmet off and it's a woman, right? We have, through millions of years of evolution, we can identify these things.
Yeah. And in contrast, that, you know, to pull that helmet off and it's a dude, everybody, I don't care whether you're man or female, and it goes, whoa, what was that?
Bitch, what?
Yeah. And it's, you know what? That's a natural reaction. That's okay.
A natural reaction. Right.
To try and tell me that I had some sort of effectual impact on any of that, and I actually thought it out, and I was trying to hurt your feelings by being shocked. Sorry, not gonna happen.
And so if you through millions of years of evolution recognize that somebody's really a dude, and you happen to call the person a dude, and they say, no, it's ma'am, and they get mad at you, in New York City, you can be fined up to $250,000.
What happens to the guy in the bar that goes up and is like, hey, what's going on, baby? And she turns around and she's dude-faced. And he goes, oh, God, and he runs off. Now, normally in situations, all the buddies at the table start laughing and ridiculing him.
Sure.
Make fun of him for the rest of his life, because that's how guys are. We won't ever let that go. Somehow, stuff like that gets actually put into long-term care, you know, long-term memory. That happens. But so now, I mean, what do? You offer to pay the fine right there to him, her, it, please, cuz with I don't even know the proper pronouns.
Right.
And you know what? Here's my free speech. I don't care. I don't care. If you out there want to be referred to as him, her, it, they, plus thing, puppy, kitten, fine. But don't expect me to know that coming up to you. And you know what? If you tell me, I'm sorry, sir, oh, okay, you did it to me, but that's all right. I want to be referred to as kitten. And I go, dude, I'm so not calling you kitten. You don't get to freaking haul me into jail for it. You don't get to regulate me any more than I get to regulate you. That's the ins and outs of free speech, free thought, free expression. Welcome to real life.
Well, and those things are, those things are just common courtesies. There's nothing wrong. And I'm sorry, but if somebody wants to be referred to as another gender, they have to understand that they're not going to know that. Yeah. And I think transgender people need to recognize, or should recognize, that, you know what, I'm not always going to pass as the opposite gender, and people will probably be able to tell it, and that's okay. Right. This is something you're choosing to have, this lifestyle, and nobody can read your mind. Right. I'm sorry, but you may not actually pass exactly for the other side. And you know what, if you correct somebody, just tell them, no, please, it's Miss or Mr. What, fine, whatever. As a common courtesy, I will call you what you want to be called. Typically.
Sure.
I will typically call you what you want to be called, but you also can't get mad at somebody if you want to be called G and they don't call you that, and they fail to call you that because that's not a word. And somebody doesn't have.
You. I don't sell drugs. I'm a prostitute. I mean,
hey,
okay,
sorry.
God, sorry.
Nobody has 30 years of practice using a made-up word called G. Nobody. You can't. These are just ridiculous. So this brings me to a whole other point that I wanted to bring up, and that's this concept of trigger warnings.
Trigger warnings.
Trigger warnings. You know what those are? You know what trigger warnings are?
Yeah, I usually cock, and I put the safety off, and I tell whoever it is they've got up to the count of. Oh wait, no, is that not what you mean?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry. What's trigger warning?
So a trigger warning is just simply a label that's put on a piece of media. It might be at the beginning of a video, it might be the beginning of a podcast, or it might be at the very top of a document, right? Basically it just says, hey, this media text, it contains content that you might find offensive, or you might find hurtful. It might hurt your feelings.
Is that like PG-13 contains violence and
essentially
they're doing that for documents and okay, all right.
They're doing that, and you typically see this in schools and in universities on college campuses, where they'll put a trigger warning on, let's say, Huckleberry Finn in literature class, right? So you're taking a literature course, you buy the Huckleberry Finn book, and the teacher will preface it, well, in the syllabus, they tell you got to buy this book to read, but there's a trigger warning. Trigger warning, use of racial language, don't get, just want to prepare you for this kind of concept. And it's, this is a type of safety. This is a safety measure, right? In order to help people, or to try to get people to not freak out. There have been cases or instances where some students in college campuses, and this is why they started putting trigger warnings on things, because a teacher might be talking about a specific topic and they happen to use, the actual language that was used at the time, and people will freak out, and students have become just crying and hysterical because they've never experienced that word before, or it was just such a terrible thing. And why, how dare the professor actually show that content? Don't they know any better? And this, I'm sorry, but life's a bitch. Get
a helmet.
In a helmet, I guess. Life's tough. You gotta buck up a little bit. You can't have we're talking about things going on college campus in a classroom with a college professor. We're not talking about you
Okay.
stumbling upon a rape that's happening in the quad. We're talking
Well,
about having a conversation about literature, for example, about things like Huckleberry Finn. Yes, they say the N word in Huckleberry Finn because it was written, it's set in the context of, you know, of the Deep South after slavery.
okay. It-
Go ahead.
if I okay, no, I'm gonna back up. Not me,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
I can't use me. I'm a biased example.
Mhm.
If I am um, a young kid coming out of high school, and I'm looking to bridge the gap between my early academic years and to learn about how to apply everything I've gotten so far into gaining my existence into the real world as a adult.
Mhm.
I would hope and pray that I go to a collegiate institution that is going to be willing to even discuss language that is a part of the friggin' world that I will hear, and actually just be able to talk about it without me freaking breaking down. And you know, full disclosure, I am a white middle-aged male. Maybe I don't get it. Maybe I don't. I think that is a very real possibility. However, as an example, you said the N word in Huckleberry Finn. I don't know a single Black American who has not handled that word in any way, shape, or form in their upbringing up till college to cause that. So I don't know if that particular example of breaking down crying was in that relation or to something else. But the fact of the matter is, if you can't take hearing a word and moving on with your life from it, then you have a lot of learning, maybe outside of the academia world, yet to do.
Well, and this just goes to this just, you know, the idea of a trigger warning, right? What we're saying is, if we're going to put a trigger warning on something, we're promoting the idea, the concept that you always have the right to feel comfortable. But you don't have the right to feel comfortable.
Well, no, I'm going to disagree with that point to it on that. A trigger warning to me sounds like a label. It's a warning label, right? And pretty much any warning or any caution, everything, I always root down to freaking lawyers, because all that is some sort of protection, like you said, a safety net for the school, for the college to be able to say somebody got sued over something about that they were forced to deal with content that they weren't prepared for, and how dare you, sir, and blah blah blah. It's purely a catch-all. That's a lawyer cover your butt stamp. So by putting this warning on, by putting this label on, we cannot be held liable. So I don't know if that's necessarily so that people can feel comfortable. But there's this overwhelming idea, I think, that we as a people, we are entitled to feel warm and fuzzy and cushioned everywhere we go. We're never going to be challenged. We're never going to be called, names. Nobody's ever going to hurt our feelings. No one's ever going to make us feel bad. Hell no, you're not even allowed to get beat up as a kid growing up anymore. Now, I'm not promoting physical violence among elementary school kids, but I think most of us had some sort of violent encounter growing up, and I know I had a few. And you know what? I didn't like them, and it was terrible. But I learned from them too. There's a lot of ugliness out there that I have learned life lessons from being a part of. And you know what? I've had hate speech shouted out at me growing up quite a bit too. I know that might be hard for people out there to really grasp or comprehend, but I was not brought up in a predominantly white neighborhood, not even close.
But see, the problem, so I still stand by the concept or the idea that trigger warnings are trying to develop the right to always feel comfortable, because they're designed around, they were created for people who were having these sort of violent PTSD style attacks of breakdowns because they heard of something that just didn't really set well with them. And I think, come on, what kind of a society are we creating here when we have people that get literally offended and having a PTSD style attack because they hear something or they happen to read something that is mild. And so I have an example of here. These are examples of trigger warnings that have been placed on certain things to protect people so that people can feel very safe about the media that they are interacting with. Remember that we put, schools, universities are putting trigger warnings on things so that the students can then make a decision and have an out, so that they don't actually have to read the book,
They don't have to do the assignment.
they don't have to do the assignment. It's like, no, I don't want to be involved in that assignment because it's going to trigger me. And so these are some examples of where trigger warnings have occurred. We've got trigger warnings for all types of very potentially offensive or upsetting content. Not the fact that they're actually offensive, or not the fact that they're actually upsetting content. I mean, yes, if there's content that, like, if there's a website, for example, that has snuff films, right? That is, I think, without a doubt, unsettling content. We're not talking about things like that. I think that kind of goes without saying, but it's potentially offensive. And if it's something is potentially offensive, well, then we have no idea if it's going to be offensive or not. And these are things not limited to things such as misogyny, the death penalty, calories in a food item.
No, wait. Calories in a food item.
Yes.
I could have gotten out of all of that nutrition stuff. I still to this day don't know how many calories are bad or not.
Right.
You could tell me that candy bar is 1,000 calories and I'll eat it and go, wait, is that a lot? Or,
yeah.
Because I don't know. Oh, sorry.
So calories in a food item, terrorism, drunk driving, how much a person weighs, racism, gun violence, stand your ground laws, drones, homophobia, PTSD, slavery, victim blaming, abuse, swearing. Let's see, child abuse, self-injury, suicide, talk of drug use, descriptions of medical procedures. I hope nobody's in medical school. Yeah. Corpses, skulls, skeletons, needles, discussion of isms.
Discussions of isms?
Of isms, racism.
Oh, racism, sexism, feminism.
Yeah.
Okay, isms. I got it. Okay.
Neuroatypical shaming, slurs including stupid or dumb, kidnapping, dental trauma, discussions of discussions of sex, even consensual, death or dying, spiders, insects, snakes, vomit, pregnancy, childbirth, blood, scarification, Nazi paraphernalia, slimy things, and holes.
This is this. I know I'm laughing my butt off, and I am so sorry because I know
holes. Holes. People need a trigger warning for holes.
Holes. Yes, I could totally see that. Yeah. Traumatic events.
How much a person weighs. You can't handle how much you weigh. Look, if you're fat, if you need to lose weight, that. Nobody needs to tell you. And yes, if somebody were to say it, so you can't go to the nurse, every time I go to the doctor, first thing I have to do is stand on the weight or stand on the scale, right? And I always look at him and I laugh and I'm like, you really don't need to tell me, I can read it.
Yeah, don't. Don't. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I think you make a very compelling case that we should ban scales in physicians' offices because obesity is a rampant problem in this, and you're just making everybody feel bad. You're hurting my feelings. I'm now not able to open up to my doctor because I can't talk about it because I'm emotionally distraught, and all I can think about the whole time is that scale was what it was, and that's damaging my health care. Right. You're actually pulling away my ability to have good health care.
And keep in mind, many of these trigger warnings they're placed in universities. They're occurring in
Oh, I don't
on
doubt that
university
whatsoever.
campuses.
Yeah.
So
Blaming
these
things. Yeah.
students are going to a place where they should be learning about different ideas and being
Right.
challenged on different things and being exposed to all types of different topics so that they get a well-rounded education and become a well-rounded individual for society. And yet we're putting trigger warnings on them on things, so to shield them, to protect them, so they always feel comfortable. What's going to happen when they go out into the real world? What's going to happen when they get a job and their boss has to, says something or yells at them? Not all bosses are nice, and even having a difficult discussion can be hurtful.
Well,
So
again, though, I'm going to just put this out here too. If you're creating a new normal in society, and this starts from elementary school to middle school, high school, collegiate level, this now becomes the norm for your day-to-day operations. Every time that you send an email, every time you send an interoffice memo, you're going to have to put trigger warnings on there for everything. I mean, this is what's going to happen because let's just face it, Sally or Sue or Tim, who's in that class, who don't like slimy things, and they don't like the word dumb, and they don't like fat or calories, they're the ones who are going to be instituting new company policies within the next 10 years that you need to put trigger warnings, and these things are not to be discussed in the office.
yeah.
And so
Wow.
this is why you get people who hunker down in their little cubicle office, and they go in at 8:00 and they're gone at 4:59 every day, and they don't talk to anybody. And every single one of these people get compartmentalized. You're in business, and coaching people in the business place. Tell me you don't see that right now.
A little.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little. And it's really sad. Well, all right.
So,
Any final thoughts on this whole topic?
if you limit free speech, you limit your expression, you limit your ability to think, and you limit, and I'm sorry, I'm going to take it even a step further. You limit your ability to love.
Ooh.
Yeah. Really think about when you met your significant other, your first girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever that was, and you actually had an emotional response, a physical attraction. Can you imagine what that would have been like if you knew in your mind you are not allowed to be attracted to that person because they were of a specific gender, sex, race, creed, color, credo? Doesn't matter.
Or if they weren't going to allow you to speak your mind,
Right. You're not allowed to actually tell them
how you feel.
that you like them,
Right.
because that may come off as aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine where this goes. Nothing that you have internal is yours anymore. Speech is the only way we have of actually communicating. There's body language and all that. It's the only thing we have as a race, as a people, as a species, in order to able to express what we are feeling inside, what we're thinking in our head, what we believe in our soul. The only thing we have is that form of free speech. If you allow it to get chipped away under the guise of, I don't care what it is, whether you want to call it political correctness or hate speech or equality or fairness, and the minute you start allowing those things to be given from yourself up, not taken, when you give those things up, everything else will be taken from you. We will have absolutely no individuality left. We will be the people in the drones that we are told we have to be. And I weep for us if that ever comes to that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks for saying all that.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And there's a lot of things people are saying that I can't stand. But I will absolutely stand by their right to say stuff that I don't like.
Well, I prefer they just, spout off on their stupidity so we can identify them.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we can help them. We can help educate them.
And I have people disagree with me and call me names all the time, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
I have a lot of people that actually like some of the stuff I say, and I love that too. But without the other, you've got to have both. You've
Yeah.
got to have that free exchange of ideas. Otherwise, we're done.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, brother.
Absolutely.
And with that, remember you can send us email at contact@fusionunderground.net. Thanks for listening, everybody. This will be up Tuesday. If you have anything you want to say, please drop us a email or give us a comment on our Facebook page. For Jason Moret, I'm Manuel Ramirez, and we're out.
Have a good night.